Well, good morning. This is Elia Hallworth with Original Minds. That isn't my usual Hawaiian slack key guitar music, but I was listening to Gregory playing that on my way here, and it was so spectacular. I had to hear a little bit more of it. My guest today is a return guest. I'm so delighted. Richard Lang. Welcome, Richard.
Good morning.
Richard first came on my program when we had Trillium Press exhibition at the Bolinas Museum. Richard is one of the masterminds and owners of Trillium Press, the Land of Yes, and it's called the Land of Yes because...
Imagine what happens when you say no.
So an artist can come to them with any idea, and somehow you figure out how to do it.
We do. It's a highly collaborative studio, and we were just talking this week about it. It's really, I think it's a recapitulation of a Renaissance studio. You come in and you have helpers, and the machines are your helpers, and you realize a vision. It's a lot of fun, and things really happen there.
Oh, amazing work comes out. And Richard is also an accomplished artist in his own right, and the Poetry Jukebox, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And now you're just blossoming into this extraordinary writer. Your wife said it's like a river pouring out of you.
I don't know. I just can't help myself.
Well, let's introduce people who don't know about this. First, let's talk about the Poetry Jukebox.
All right. Poetry Jukebox is a performance piece, and it's an actual physical jukebox that I wear. And I have memorized, at this point, I've memorized 117 poems.
Extraordinary poems.
And yeah, I think they're great, other people's poems. And so I had this idea. The memorizing came from out of a kind of dire time when everything was going bad and I couldn't sleep at night. So I started memorizing poems. And then I had this idea. I thought, oh, gee, at Burning Man, this will be great. I'll be the Poetry Jukebox. And then, of course, I woke up the next morning and thought better of it and thought that was crazy. And I went down to the studio, and Judith had already started making the jukebox and said, "You're going to do it."
Judith Selby, his wife.
Yeah. And so I did it for a couple of years at Burning Man, and it was fun. The first year, it was very furtive. I was a little shy about the whole thing. And then the next year, I really got into it and figured I had fulfilled my obligation to realizing the vision. And I threw the jukebox in the fire at Burning Man and thought, well, I'm done with this. And I went home and 2 weeks later started writing. It was amazing. It was like the poems had become little seeds festering inside.
Well, before we go into your work, can we give them an example? Can I give you a number? And
Sure.
9.
Sure. Number 9. Oh, that's, it's just, I'll give you a little bit of it. It's
too long.
It's very apropos these days. It's called Shine Perishing Republic by Robinson Jeffers. And he wrote it in 1925. Shine Perishing Republic. While this America settles in the compost of its own vulgarity, heavily thickening toward empire, and protest is the merest bubble in the molten mass that pops and sighs out, I smile sadly, remembering that the flower fades to fruit and the fruit fades to make soil. Shine, perishing republic.
How appropriate to today.
Yeah, it goes on, but 1925.
So you actually did your reading debut in the courtyard of the Bolinas Museum.
I did.
That was very exciting.
It was.
And people were just overwhelmed.
Well.
Yeah, so you've gone on to tell us about what's happened since. You've gotten some grand awards and recognition.
Well, some funny awards and some pretty exciting things. I did get a grant from the Marin Arts Council for writing, and but I think my favorite is I sent a poem to my sister-in-law, and she submitted it to the International Poetry Society contest. And a bronze medal came in the mail. I had won third prize, and they told me I was 109 third prize winners out of 25,000. And then I proceeded to get emails every day saying, why was I not buying the $119.95 Claret cup that I had won? And why was I not buying the $450 leather-bound version of all the collected poems of the winners, complete with a CD with a recording of my poem read by William Shatner?
Oh, my.
So anyway, the bronze medal is affixed to the front of the jukebox. And it's funny, I write, and I brought some of these this morning. I write poems on my commute. And so I won, I don't know if you call it winning, but I got $5 checks twice from the Pacific Sun for the Freeway Flyer Poetry Contest, big contest out of that. I'm going for the hat trick this year.
Your poem was really amazing. Well, so today you said you're going to read some stories about museums.
Yeah, I thought, with the new director at the Blenus Museum and
Andy Seberg.
And I think, as an artist, I my education was in museums, and I went to my art school. Early art school was at the Corcoran Museum in Washington, D.C., that had an art school, and I grew up in a small town in Illinois, but my parents would take us on excursions about 6 times a year into Chicago, and we go to the Art Institute.
Well, that's interesting because Vandy, who is Lucy Van Sant Seberg, our new director, like Dolores Richards, our former director, grew up in Chicago, and Vandy talks about how much her whole youth going to the Chicago Art Institute fueled what she has done for the rest of her life in the arts.
Oh.
And she's very interested now in bringing much more of a literary bent to the museum as well, besides art and history. So this is very appropriate.
Well,
let's begin.
All right. This is the introduction. I have a lot of museum stories. I've chosen a couple right off the bat from France. But this is just the introduction to the, if I'm going to publish this thing, this is the introduction to the museum story. So, architecture, dance, poetry, drama, music, painting are methods humans have always used in a psychic technology to change the mind from one state to another. Imagine sitting in Chartres Cathedral all day, hearing the chanting choir, watching the light flow through the pictures of suffering and redemption on the one day of the week when you don't have to be at sweaty labor. The pictures in glass become jeweled seraphim as the sun wheels through the day, lighting them up. Stepping into a big interior space instantly morphs the brain. Everywhere where people have settled for any time at all, the big space structures go up, and at no little expense to the people. Temples and cathedrals, palaces for gods and kings, theaters for Euripides and Verdi, gathering places for the refreshment of the soul, or focal points to evoke structure. Most lately, it's been the art museums, spanking new on the human scene, that are our focal points. They've sprung up everywhere, propitiating the gods we most love, the gods of a clever mind and deft hands. The oldest museums go back to the start of the Enlightenment in the 17th century. The offices of the Medici, the Uffizi, became the first modern museum. The Ashmolean in England in the late 1600s, and then the force started in earnest with the Palace of the Louvre, transformed into a people's museum after the Revolution in 1789. With the Enlightenment came the notion that humans could improve, and in fact, the idea of improvement was a human disposition evidenced by the advancing course of civilization. In mid-19th century, museums began springing up all over the Western world, and now we have 21st century space frames and twisted clouds that show off our technical prowess and the will to express how it feels to be in this very moment of history. The Palace of Hatshepsut balances its own moment well against the Bilbao in Guggenheim. Though museums are newcomers to the human architecture, mustering up the invisible, the beginnings, of course, go all the way back to the caves of Stone Age people. You had to pay the price to see the paintings inside. Everyone knows that to see the images on the walls, one had to crawl through silent black passageways, often belly down through lightless rock ducts, journeying into cavern spaces, wombs of the earth, gestating what the mind had projected onto the walls with pigments rubbed into stone or blown through hollow bone tubes. Of course, the caves at Lascaux and Peshmeral were not museums. They do not point strongly at the human will to make spaces that change, but they do point strongly at the human will to make spaces that change the mind from one state to another. We want it. The stories that follow are all a close-in look at trips through these treasure houses that do, in fact, have a change in mind linked to the treasures themselves. So that's the introduction to these.
And this is KWMR Radio, 90.5 in Point Reyes Station, 89.3 in Bolinas. And I have my guest here today is Richard Lang, who is reading his works. So what is next, Richard?
Well, let's start with the Musée de l'Homme in Les Aisies in France. It's in I mentioned the caves as the first museums, and so this is a museum dedicated to prehistory.
And where is it?
It's in Les Aisies in the Dordogne in southwestern France.
Okay.
High up into the cliff face, built right into it, is the Archaeological Museum of Man, the Musée de l'Homme. This is southwestern France, the Dordogne. Inside there is case after case of stone tools lined up behind glass, tools to make a living. This is the museum of the first people, the cave people, right in the Dordogne region where their habitat and culture thrived. There are lots of examples of the material culture of these folks who developed a style of art that lasted 30,000 years before vanishing into oblivion. The animals on cave walls and pieces of bone and antler are rendered with sweeping, masterful lines, and full-shadowed masses are stylistic conventions that were part aesthetic and part convenient to the caves. They are found from the Urals in Central Asia to Spain. It started in the glacial period beginning 45,000 years ago. I am the hired help on a fancy art-making trip. I'm the painting instructor, so we can learn to paint and draw in southern France. We're painting landscapes, gardens, and the caves themselves. Some groups I've taken on these trips are shut-down wannabes who like the coddling of an on-the-bus, off-the-bus kind of tour. But this group is a good one, and after the first week we've gotten into a mutually creative synergy. Everyone's avid. We've been led into some of the caves without the flocks of buzzing tourists to sit for an hour or so and draw in the quiet. They respect artists here. People who've grown up around great art and historical architecture aren't afraid of artists like people are in the States. We're led into the caves with special permission, but no paints and no erasing. Drips or rubber crumbs might contaminate the paintings, but we can draw to our heart's content, and we do. And though the trip is filled with the distraction of shopping and gourmet dinners and 3- and 4-star hotels, mundane, magnetic attractions for most, our group is really working at making art of authentic feeling. We are being let into the cave of Peshmeral. The guard opens the cave door, locked and protected from vandals and souvenir hunters, and to limit carbon dioxide breath, encouraging algae bloom on the paintings. The cool smell of wet dirt rushes up, chimneyed up into the sharp summer heat. The air hits the face with a fungoid essence, and down the steps and into the cave floor we go. It's a wet place, crunchy and echoey underfoot. It's not hospitable. Climbing down steep steps, the cave opens into a high vault. It's a living cave with growing formations and little drips. Gloppy spires of rock and sheets of frozen calcium carbonate are lit with drama, and then across the 40-yard space, lit for your pleasure, are the spotted horses of Peshmeral. Lit the same way, too, long ago in oil lamplight, you imagine, because it makes such sense for this view to be seen as you would have seen it after crawling 50 yards in a cramped and lightless tunnel opening out to this underground room. There's no question as you gawk that this place was used as some kind of dancing ground, a theater at the dawn of the symbolic mind. There's no room for the jaded or the cynic. You've seen it a million times in picture books, but here on the wall where it was painted 28,000 years ago, seeing it for the first time, one swoons a bit. 2 horses, necks in full stallion curve of mating display, painted onto a slab of rock that's silhouettes of 2 horses prefigured in the stone. A chunk of rock, elephant size, shows the outer edge, a cloud shadow of a horse head. It's figured in the rock itself. Following the curve of the rock, and the head and mane blue-black and solid, and the body a polka dot shape made of blown pigment, the horses are twins back to back and 1/4 superimposed. Hands in negative shadow of the blown pigment make an airbrush outline. This picture is an arrow across time, a glowing sign that there were people here, people who took their existence seriously as a great mystery, and they made music. The ape-born creature was waking into a new way of being, conscious of death and life, expressed here in this cave. Was it the Holy of Holies? The fossilized footprints frozen in limestone mud are those of children, instruction toward a new way. At first you can only stare across the wide gap, and then we settle and gather and go round on the path and sit on the ground, and the only sound, the scritching pencils, a hollow chorus of intention and concentration. There's more. Should we go on?
I think so.
Okay. Now we're off to the museum, and high on the cliff is a giant statue of a Neanderthal. It's a comic book and gawky. It was made in the 1920s, but it's earnest anyway, even though it has a caveman club over its shoulder. We're a very convivial group with all the usual giddiness of travel, but we've all softened and slowed down a bit by the impact of seeing into the human mind so far back. This group has got soul. Our guide for the tour of the museum is a sprite of a woman who catches on to our enthusiasm and gets fuller of herself. When she sees our notebooks and drawing pencils at the ready, her lecture, a rote thing usually, has a new spark, and she goes on an hour past her usual. Her delivery is animated and rolls along telling the stories of cave discovery and how close we are to the people who made these things, and so close to the vital animals we once were. How this necklace we're looking at behind the glass in the case, a string of 72 teeth made from the 2 front incisors of elk. 36 elk gave up the ghost to make this. And then she reveals the recent shock to the curators that in a periodic cleaning one of the teeth proved to be no tooth at all, but a sculpted replica of a tooth carved in mammoth ivory. That's very hard to carve stuff, and it's artfully done. Did someone carve the extra tooth so it would come out even? Was one lost and replaced? Evenness and symmetry are hallmarks of a developed mind, not to mention the skillful carving. Any way you look at it, it's a stunning fact. Then she shows us a bone group and a skull arranged to replicate its situation at discovery. It was a man buried with many artifacts, someone of accumulated respect. What the ruined sockets in the jaw and the bent and fused knees and spine show is a toothless arthritic who had to have been carried wherever these nomadic people went, and carried for at least 6 years given the evidence of very advanced disease, living into and beyond a normal lifespan. He could not walk or chew. It was strong devotion. We see case after case of stone tools hafted to sticks with pitch and iron oxide, the succession from the primitive Neanderthal hand axes from the Acheulean period, and the most stunning thing, she says, the tiny ivory sewing needle, a thing that allowed free movement for the winter hunt in tailored clothes. A huge step in the ever-improving toolkit. Is this beauty or pure utility? Spear throwers with marks making a calendar give notice to the growing and ebbing seasons. It seems obvious from the marks of the moon phases and rows of dots that this really was a calendar. There are bone fish hooks and finally the bow and arrow, the late arrival. It's clear that these people had stories and loved the sensual of observing their world, of animals, of holding a beautiful thing. From repeated marks on easily vibrated stalagmites, like stone marimbas, they made music. They made music with bull roars and drums and flutes. It dawns in the mind that eating and comfort and the pleasure that art provides has been a human pursuit since the beginning. Back at our hotel, a 400-year-old manor house made French glamorous with a hostess of fashion-model beauty, we eat a sumptuous dinner al fresco in a summer evening, warm and green, honey candles fluttering on white tablecloths with hefty silverware. Big silver domes are whisked off the plates by servers in a simultaneous drama of presentation. A pink and white langoustine lying on a bed of cheesy risotto dyed black with squid ink. Perfect little orange melon balls rest in a red bed of shaved prosciutto. The dinner tables are lined up along a soft flowing mill race, ancient with big cracks in the stones spilling with moss. Ducks dip and posture as the blue evening comes on. Ah, the cheese. Orange candlelight, blue evening, the cheese.
Boy, you brought you gave me a chill when you talked about that we've all seen the photographs of Lascaux and the horses, but to see them, really see them for the first time with your own eyes in that cave, what a sense.
Yeah.
And that human history goes back to making beauty.
It does.
War and beauty.
War and beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Blood and beauty. It's ever been that way. Ever will. As long as...
And how something as simple as an ivory sewing needle revolutionized the way people could live.
Oh, yeah. Imagine wearing, rags of animal skins, and then suddenly, they're sewn so that you can move.
And you can form them.
Yeah, form them.
To your own body.
Yeah. There was an outfit like that found in Siberia that had 10,000 mammoth ivory beads.
Oh, my.
Mammoth ivory's hard to carve, as I said. 10,000 of them.
To make beauty.
Yeah, to make beauty.
And the idea of carving the elk teeth are such a tradition, that kind of necklace and decoration in this culture, in the American, not in this culture, in this country of the American Indian culture. So there it is, a kind of link way, way, way back.
Well, there's the elk teeth, and then there's one carved. So it comes out even.
So that it matches perfectly.
Yeah.
A way to repair the necklace.
Yeah.
Without killing another elk.
Yeah, without killing another elk. Or, well, if you killed another elk, it wouldn't come out even. Or maybe the elk had a broken tooth. Or who knows? It's just wonderful to think about.
Well, I think before we go on with another reading, we're just going to stop and do I need to read about one of our sponsors, and that way we won't be interrupted, because I hope you have the next thing ready.
I do.
All right. So
we'll go to Cezanne Studio.
Oh, perfect for this time. This is KWMR Radio, 90.5 FM in Bolinas and 89.3 in Bolinas. Didn't I get that confused? 89.3 in Bolinas and 90.5 in Point Reyes Station. And this is Real Community Radio, which is supported by the Dance Palace Community Center, located on the corner of 5th and B Street in Point Reyes Station. Member-supported, the Dance Palace offers classes, events, and facility rentals for the communities of West Marin. For membership information, volunteer opportunities, and a schedule of events, visit www.dancepalace.org or phone 663-1075. That's 663-1075. Another of our great resources in West Marin. This is Original Minds. I'm Elia Hallworth, and my guest today is Richard Lang, who is reading some of his most recent writings. So what do you have next? We're going to Cezanne?
We're going to... I'm staying in... this is a visit to Cezanne Studio in Aix. And I don't think I have to say anything more about it. I think just start it. Cezanne Studio. My knack for the French language goes as far as the accent. It's a befuddlement for most, but it's easier for me. English, American English, is a middle palate language, going with hard R's in the mouth always drawing back. French is way back in the mouth and swallowed up and high in the nose. For me, it's something I can do with conviction. But that's as far as it goes. I'm pretty limited with the language itself, the accent getting me further than I deserve. I can order food, count, and generally ask for things that I need, but mostly I'm a novice with a convincing accent. So, for example, when I ask directions to Cezanne, I'm told with rapid-fire presumption that it's this and this and then that and that and this. It's no clue. I am lost. I'm in my tiny red M&M of a rental car driving round and round the famous fountain of Aix, round the three goddesses of Aix, around art, agriculture, and justice, standing in their goddess wear in white marble. They're high up on the highest tier. Aix is famous for its hundreds of fountains, and this one's a focal point. Well, this is a stall me going round and round, but I'm trying to get my bearing, as the fountain is the axle for the spokes of the streets radiating out into the town. The Mirabeau, the long, wide avenue, the anchor of the old wall town, begins right at the fountain, and it's the direction I want to go, but traffic's not allowed. I know when I asked directions, I heard Mirabeau, Mirabeau. On the street itself, The Mirabeau is a high arc of sycamores, the plane trees of Provence. They arch over the street, just leafed out, and still hot yellow-green in the spring light. The sycamores are seldom trimmed here, as they usually are other places, and are allowed to grow up into a leafy cathedral, their trunks piebald columns of buff and olive, reassuring and cool. The promenade of the Mirabeau is lined with relaxed cafes. There's lots of al frescoing here and a great calm stroll with no motor traffic. But it's not good for me, so I try to parallel the Mirabeau off to the right. I'm getting somewhere, but it's time to ask again. There's a group of college-age kids in high spirits, maybe 20 of them. This is a famous university town. I stop and ask. I'll try the French, but I bet there's an English speaker eager to show off for friends. I roll down the window, and before I can open my mouth, paff! Right in the face, a handful of flour. And then another one, paff! And they run off joyous and triumphant, leaving me spluttering and raging at the empty street. In one breath, I become a ghost. Of course, I just read about these hijinks in M.F.K. Fisher's Two Towns in Provence. After finishing their exams, the students run around making an insolent havoc. The XENs know better and steer clear, but I was a greenhorn just off the boat. I was prime meat. Fisher had written with charm and tickle of delight about the student release of good fun, but in an instant I was in a tumbling rapid of temper. I was in a rage at the kids, at myself for having donned the fool's cap and my hubris to speak French, and then that helpless standing in the yawning hole when life changes in a blink. But for the long-term effect, it could have been a gunshot or a car wreck or any of those modern insults that slam reality from one state to another. A hole in the fabric of the expected flow. We expect things to go according to plan, and of course they usually do, but it's how these vicissitudes are handled that makes life for a life well lived. I'm not handling it well. I want to both hunt these miscreants down and beat righteous wrath on them, as well as crawl into a ditch and pull the leaves over my white dusted head. At a moment, it's a hole in time. I drive on and find a public toilet and clean up and cool off. So hard to be the butt of a joke, and out there on the street, I ask a woman in simplest French, not showing off my accent, "Me want where Atelier Cézanne rests?" The answer is ici. It's here. I've just crossed the street where the street changes its name to Atelier Cézanne. I'm right there. It's a half a block away. I'm inside and the only visitor. I've got the place to myself with two caretakers just on the verge of elderly and very proprietary. I've come into their domain. The place smells of apples, of all things. I'm still in a spooked-out state of mind after the flower bombs, and the spiky etched web of the dense garden trees, still not leafed out in early May, give the place a ghostly feel. The woman in charge, taking the entrance fee and fussing and moving things while one visits, move in a studied dawdle, dusting and never letting you out of their sight. "Combien de temps a Cézanne travaillé ici?" I ask, not using my accent. "How long did Cézanne work here?" "Oh, tous les jours jusqu'au le maître mort." "Every day until the master died." "No, how many years?" "Ah, 5 ans, 5 years." "You are American? Vous êtes Américain?" "Oui." Marilyn Monroe a ici faire une visite en 1955. Marilyn Monroe visited here in 1955. She shows me the entry in the visitor's book. "A wonderful visit," the dream girl wrote, after crossing out boo-boopy-doop. It's true. I try to imagine her here, blonde and perfume and red lips in this austere monk's room, with the solid north wall of window light and the neutral gray west wall. Ghosts are everywhere. How did Marilyn get to this place? She'd married Joe DiMaggio in January of '54 and divorced him that same year. I can't imagine Joltin' Joe brought her here, but I can imagine Arthur Miller wooing her with this place. "I'm going to open the world for you, baby." I can imagine him telling her about the guy who built this room to pursue his dream of art that would capture so much with just bits of paint and canvas. The world in a single painting, and then the world as a life's work. I can imagine Miller feeling a professional camaraderie for anybody. If anybody tried so hard for so much, it'd be Cézanne, and for so long. He tried to get time, to get the gaze of time as it flowed over objects, staring hard, and all the time having a body present in time, moving both in space and in the imagination. They call him the first true proto-cubist, and I pretty much agree. He'd paint and paint the same subjects over and over, not just in different light, as Monet was fond of doing. That, yes, but more, he could paint the parallax of motion as the head moved, as the eye moved, and that he was little recognized in his life and just kept doing it and died doing it, catching the bad lung while outside painting in the rain. There are lots of ghosts here, and I think Miller would have admired Cézanne's tenacity and honesty, but would have taken a warning from his interactions with the world. He did not like the public and had famous feuds with all of his friends, including Émile Zola, who used the grumpy recluse as a character in his writing. We see way too many Cézannes for my taste. A lot of what he tried for never really happens, and though he was the first to leave his process as a record, he was uninterested in finishing some of his experiments, and there are of real interest for the academics who love his work just because of this. He leaves the bones around to reconstruct his thinking. There are some really great successes where, after seeing 3 or 4 in a room, like, say, at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., you see a thing like The Water's Edge, where you look and then you do a double take as the thing really comes alive, like you could see the molecules moving jittery and restless, all one thing. Trees, houses, water, doesn't matter. The thing I'm feeling in his painting room, a space he himself designed, is his undaunted momentum, dogged, stubborn, and relentless. It's the myth of the modern artist, a madman fighting the good fight, the Cervantes crazy man with a mere brush against the windmills of modern middle class full of fear and uniformity. Every day he felt a failure, and every day he'd try again. Trying for what? It's this more than the structuralism of his technique that is described in his letters, notions that got the father of Cubism sign slapped on him. So much has been written about how he flattened the picture plane, how his broken strokes broke the surface of the objects, and blah and more blah. In this room, you could see it was his pure, transcendental brand of existentialism. He saw every object in the world, including himself, as an equal part in the harmony of things. In his letters, he writes how the mountains, the apples, the cup, the bowl are all one thing, himself, the eye, the hand, trying to say just that with colors. When I get home, I think I'll try a little harder.
Oh, Richard, you brought him more alive and more dimension than any art book I've ever read about Cézanne. That was lovely.
Thanks. Yeah, it's fun to read these. Sort of carries me into the place again. Should we stay in France?
That's fine. We're on a roll.
We're on a roll. How about
that description of not only the work of the artist, but the artist's life and feeling was really rich. I can see why people would want to go on an art trip with you any day.
Well, it's fun. Some of these trips are fun. Some aren't.
Well, depending on the group.
All depends on the group.
Yeah.
We've had some doozies. Although Judith and I haven't done it in 5 years. Maybe we'll do it again.
Well, I'm speaking with Richard Lang, who's reading some of his recent writings.
So, should we go to the Rodin Museum in Paris?
Absolutely.
All right. The small museums of Paris, built around the old studios of the great artists of Paris, Maillot, Rodin, Delacroix, have a verticality and a depth that the monster museums like the Louvre sweep away in the horizontal rush to see the whole picture. I love these little places. The feeling of place and time and the energetic sense of a single creative soul are vivid. And there's a funny thing that happens in these small museums. In the high summer season, crowded with tourists, the pace of viewing sifts into the pace of certain others until, after visiting 3 or 4 rooms, you're traveling in a loose group collated by the pace, collated by the legs on the same caterpillar, the tribe of a certain viewing pace making a special party. After days of muggy yellow skies, the night rain has washed the sky back to blue, cool, dry air. The windows in the Rodin Museum are thrown open, and the fresh, natural radiance pouring through glows on the glistening bronzes and on the marble. At Rodin's museum, made just for him, his forms writhe and twist, seemingly one body out of the pith of creation. The coherence of one creator showing the power, the delight at having a body at all. Heroes like Balzac, paired with withered crone women, musy, sexy girls, and the doomed burghers of Calais. The body carries the weight. The body carries the weight of the soul's feeling power. This is the magic of Rodin, that material can represent not simple presence or heroic remembrance, but the pure rush of human feeling. Rodin brought the vitality of Michelangelo through the sieve of the neoclassical revival. By the mid-19th century, sculpture had become a placeholder. It was far from the thing of itself. The overworked, super-polished work of his contemporaries had the look of corpses prepared for viewing. Doesn't he look just like he did in life? State-sanctioned sculpture devolved into road signs that were mere pointers in the landscape of human passion. But Rodin was a realist in a somatic city. This work is no pointer towards something outside of itself. Rodin revivified sculpture in classical tales, shirking nothing. No horror in the Book of Passion was off limits, nor was Dante's Book of the Dead. Ugolino from the Divine Comedy devours his dead children. Francesco and Paolo are locked in a deadly kiss, even though it's become a signature piece for Rodin, the kiss. All of it done in the coherence of one dynamic vision, and then in all of it, tenderness floats like a fine mist through the rooms. The shell of a crouching woman in white marble becomes a holographic pinpoint, opening into the whole history of the human body. You get the feeling that flesh itself grows into pre-existing moles, slip clay poured into molds made in the savannas of Africa. My own training is as a sculptor, with Rodin as the benchmark. Though in this era his overarching program falls into the dry gulch of academic wool gathering when it seems that information is supplanting substance, the question then is what makes him modern. Shimmering impressionistic surfaces, his use of repetition. These are formal concerns, and they are modern, but I think it may be his unflinching existentialism, his look at human existence as heroic in the most common gesture, saying, I am here, I am here, I am here in a post-Darwinian, post-Freudian, post-Einsteinian world. I am here, and you are here. Just looking at the gates of hell with studies for this major piece all around, there is Rodin's branding icon, the thinker. It sits miniature on the lintel looking over the writhing bodies passing back and forth between the worlds under him. The giant-sized thinker is out front. Other life-size figures from the gates of hell are standing through the museum as though the gates of hell was Rodin's mind itself pouring out psyche made of meat. Notwithstanding its inability to evoke passions in the hoi polloi of art monthlies, quoting the latest hysterical trends of identity art post-Derrida, post-Iziges, the gates of hell is a very muscly piece of art, and not just the physical. It's of course that, but more muscly of feeling. If you don't stand in front of that piece and think, yes, I am really going to die, and yes, my actions here on earth make a difference, then Rodin's gate is lost on you. A gate to the afterlife, where the infinitely thin membrane between here and there acts as a blade paring the soul, peeling off the driving engine of passion. I'm here at the museum, traveling in with our little peripatetic coterie, both opened up and numbed by the too much of it all. Our party includes a Portuguese couple. He's in the military, at least it seems so by his haircut and build. They're both with shiny new rings. It's the 5-day honeymoon leave in Paris. One upstairs room has the outside double doors flung open to the clipped formal gardens to receive the air of this fine, bright day. With its iron railing for sitting, this French door makes a perfect frame for the honeymooner photo. In accented French, they ask an open-faced woman to take the picture. She hasn't been in our little group, and she's wearing a long coat. The couple position themselves, and the woman moves out of the corner to frame the shot with the point-and-shoot. The smile face the honeymooners have put on changes to horror as they see, as we all see, the recruited photographer has a distressing and tormenting limp. Her twisted legs are barely on this side of standing, let alone walking. She's been in a wheelchair that was tucked into a corner, hidden by her friends. She's just taking a break from the low-level view she's accustomed to. There's a move to come to her aid. The groom starts to slide off his perch on the railing. The bride shoots him a look. But they stop. When he sees, when we all see, the radiant look on her face. Finally, after years of being aided, she's been asked to do a small service. Her look is filling the room. Time stops. The private moment between the woman and the couple becomes a public moment as the bride and groom position, snap, flash, thank yous exchanged, it's over. We all move back from this microdrama back to the museum. Some of us exchange the shy smile of a shared intimate moment among strangers. The great art has set the stage, but the unasked-for drama says that feeling can be transferred, not the simple fact of sadness, exaltation, or the wince of longing or the comic, but the sublime feeling of an open heart.
Oh, Richard, how lovely. And this is Original Minds with Richard Lang reading some of his work. I'd like to tell you all that this is KWMR Radio, 90.5 FM in Point Reyes Station and 89.3 in Bolinas. This is Original Minds. I'm Elijah Hallworth, and my guest is Richard Lang, who is one of the owners of Trillium Press. He's an artist. We now know that he leads art groups at times. And he does the Poetry Jukebox. He writes extraordinary poetry, and this is the first time I've heard this series of writings about museums. I hope this does get published.
Oh, we'll see. We'll see.
Because one wants to go back and savor some of these images and sentences over and over.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, it's for me, it's a nice way to go back. Yeah, museums have really been a place that it means a lot to me. And something happens in the mind when you go to museums.
Yes.
Whether you want it to or not. Whether it's the, bored teenager. I have a drawing of my son. We were at the Accademia in Venice. And it was just a cruelty to my poor 14-year-old.
to have to experience this history.
Yeah, but there he was kind of snugged up into an empty niche in the wall, a marble niche, and he was kind of cooling himself off, and I did a drawing of him. It was called The Martyrdom of Saint Eli.
But has he looked back with gratitude at having experienced those things and having them in his knowledge?
Oh, yeah. No, it was, all three of my kids are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would say that almost a year that I spent when I was 20, just going to all the great museums in Europe and living in little villages and going to the great theaters and opera houses. And I still... I've been back, but I still cull from that education early on.
Yeah, it's...
I'm sure they do, too.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, let's see, it's 1:45. We have about 10 minutes, so...
Should we stay in France?
Whatever you choose.
Bien sûr. This is called Les Aveugles au Pompidou, The Blind at the Pompidou. Some of you may have seen images of this museum. It's that big museum. It's a Rector set thing with all the pipes on the outside. The Beaubourg, it's called also. So this is The Blind at the Pompidou. I'm at the Beaubourg Museum, the Pompidou in Paris. The museum, that city block filled with a postmodern vision of pipes and structure on the outside, heating and cooling system, escalators, all on the outside of the building, painted like Tinker Toy colors. It's an exciting disturbance in the heart of the ancient Jewish quarter of Paris. I'm alone, and in that peripatetic drift through the strata of supermodern artworks, and then onto a retrospective of the American Robert Morris. Morris was famous as a big-time minimalist in the 60s, using industrial materials to fill museum spaces. Great swags of inch-thick industrial felt slung across pristine museum walls made an authoritative manifesto of art stripped of romance. He had a show at the museum in Washington, D.C., where I went to school. In the neoclassical museum on marble floor galleries, he had placed 20-foot, 16-inch square wooden beams as though they were tossed by giants. Over the years, he changed, and the pictures I'd seen of his work looked like a 180-degree turn toward the figurative, and they looked downright romantic. The main room at the Beaubourg was showing his large bronze work. There are portals and gateways like Rodin's famous Gates of Hell. They are gateways in black metal, figures writhing out of the wall itself, skulls and bones, apocalyptic burnt-out corpses, real nuclear hallucinations. They are very dramatic and altar-like and darkly nightmared. I was excited to see these things, that a mind could move through a signature minimalist style and onto work that could easily have come out of the 19th century. The officious French guards that were posted about with their usual quick-to-scold finger wags lest anyone get close to the art. Woe betide anyone who would actually touch. With a sudden cacophony, a large group filled the gallery, shouting and laughing, calling across the hushed space. The group not only touched the works, but were there rubbing their hands all over. The guards freaked, shouting, running around, their sanctum violated, their holy of holies swiftly and completely invaded. Rushing in red-faced, the director clapped his hands 3 times, and it was quiet. He conferred with the guards, huddled in the middle. I listened, and I heard that he had given his special permission for this group of blind, mixed with some learning-disabled students from a school in Paris, to touch this group of bronzes. The guards went back to their post, vibrating with inner conflict. The group continued, and the noise rising up again in happy contact with the art. It was a great contrast for Morris's dark, apocalyptic visions and a great and memorable visit to the museums. Morris's works got double-planted in my memory in greatly expanded version.
You know, so often we have pieces in the Bolinas Museum that it's very hard for people not to touch. It's a great joy when a sculptor feels comfortable with saying we can give permission to touch, because you want to run your hand over those central images.
Well, when we produce books, we always produce what we called handling copies. So you don't have to put the gloves on. You can
read and let what happens. What about, since we only have about 7 minutes left, do you have any poems?
I do. I do.
Let's
I think I do
do
here.
a few of those. This is Richard Lang reading to us.
Because I commute from West Marin to the city every day. They say you should write what you know. So I sit in the car for a couple hours every day. So I'm working on a series of poems called The 53 Stages of My Commute, after Hokusai.
Yes.
Yeah, Hokusai did a famous series of woodblock prints called The 53 Stages of the Tokaido. And it's the road between Tokyo and Kyoto. And they're famous resting places with views of famous mountains and the sea. And anyway, these are from my 53 views of my commute. Over the crest of Candlestick Point, quick spring showers pass and leave the road dark and glossed onto the Bayshore flats. The water's close at hand, sparkling in broken glitter confetti. A few ducks resting, feeding, bobbing, look like notes on a staff. Under the high storm clouds moving east, the Contra Costa Hills are a purple wave, restating the melody of the ducks. A tandem double-deck car transport is speeding past on my left, way too fast. The 2 trailers are rocking in a waltz syncopation, 2 metronomes beating opposite time. Snugged in, the bright gumdrop cars are red, white, and blue, rocking double time. Mitsubishi Outlanders, it turns out, just off the boat. Little packets of commerce speeding through this tiny corpuscle in the giant body of us. On the radio is news of the most recent flare-up in the chronic virus of war that has plagued this giant human body from the beginning. Me, I'm going to work. Work I like. Another, all right. Yeah, you can shout out like you're in church or something. I'm riding behind a polished mirror, a convex silver ellipse, the rear end of a gas truck. We are clipping along in smooth, unrelenting speed, the gray concrete, the white lines peeling away on an incessant conveyor, melting into the limpid stainless steel. burning itself into memories, the image of my black car, my hand raised in salutation. I see it as me waving in stop motion, my car blazing along, at once a still image, and then a cartoon of me being devoured into the shining mirror of time.
I can identify with that from all my trips driving up north on 5, going up to Washington State, behind those trucks where the whole world is reflected in them.
The whole world, yeah. 53 stages. One more?
Yes.
Walking down a steep part of Gough Street, with the jarring jounce of gravity's pull, a shirtless man on a cool day stepped down shirtless in the early morning sunlight. His skin is the color of heavy cream and dark coffee, with the build of a middleweight in good shape. Big shoulders, cut muscles, moving, relentless, downhill, shirtless. His right hand holds out a gray suit jacket, holds it stretched out far from his body like it was a dead thing, like it carried a stench, but was valuable nonetheless. He rounds the corner and lets the jacket drop. His sharp-pressed pants and shined shoes move around the corner as he studies the soft heap of it on the concrete sidewalk. As the light changes, he's off again, holding the jacket like he was stretching to hand it off to an invisible someone who really needed it.
Oh, Richard, this has been delightful. Thank you so much. Now, what's coming up for you?
What's coming up? Let's see. Burning Man's coming up. The Poetry Jukebox will be at Center Camp in Burning Man.
And you also mentioned to me that you sometimes do the Poetry Jukebox for parties and special events where you appear and people can just give you a number and some magnificent poem rolls off your tongue.
Yeah, none of my poems. I don't use my own poems in the Poetry Jukebox, but yeah, we've done it at the MoMA Artist Gallery at a benefit for 826 Valencia. For the Center for the Book, San Francisco Center for the Book. Most recently appeared at the Marin County Fair. Did an appearance at the 8th grade assembly at Marina Middle School. Scared me to death.
Your hardest audience. I bet they loved it.
Well, they actually did love it. It was for Jerry Fleming. Jerry Fleming, who's a West Marin guy, teaches at Marin Middle School, or at Marina Middle School, and he made them write thank you notes. And he wouldn't tell them my name, but they Googled me and found out what my name was. So I got 63 forced thank you notes. And one of them, my favorite...
They should be collected.
No, they are. They are, but the favorite was, Dear Mr. Poetry Jukebox, haha, Richard Lang. When Mr. Fleming told us about this performance, we thought, oh no, another patronizing hour of boredom. But oh no, we were thrilled and delighted. Thank you for coming.
Very nice. Well, I'm thrilled and delighted. Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
This has been a wonderful hour.